Story 1.
I had always been drawn to the unknown. As a paranormal investigator, I thrived on the eerie and unexplained. The Lost Bay, hidden deep within Maine's dense forests, was the ultimate mystery. Locals spoke of it in hushed whispers, their eyes wide with fear. They warned of a curse that had plagued the area for centuries. Hunters avoided it, and old fishermen shared chilling tales of unseen forces. I needed to see it for myself. With minimal gear and a burning curiosity, I ventured into the woods, determined to uncover its secrets. From the first step, I felt a strange energy in the air. The further I walked, the thicker the forest grew, its shadows stretching longer with each passing minute. It was only midday, yet it felt like dusk. The path twisted and turned, guiding me deeper into darkness. I could hear the whisper of the wind between the trees, but it almost sounded like voices, murmuring just out of earshot. Finally, I reached the shore of the bay. The water was black, still as a mirror, reflecting the darkening sky. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my breath visible in the cold air. It felt as if the bay itself was watching me, waiting. I knew then that there was no turning back. I had found something that should never have been disturbed. As I stood on the shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The stories I had heard about this place flashed through my mind. People spoke of ghostly apparitions, strange lights, and whispers that could drive a person mad. I told myself these were just stories, but I couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread. I set up my equipment, trying to focus on my task. My camera, voice recorder, and EMF detector were all I had brought with me. I wanted to capture evidence of the paranormal, proof that this place was more than just legend. As I worked, I noticed the temperature dropping rapidly. It was too cold for this time of year. My breath came out in puffs of mist, hanging in the air like ghostly apparitions. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared on the water's surface. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but it grew brighter, pulsating like a heartbeat. I grabbed my camera, capturing the strange phenomenon. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, mesmerized. I knew I was witnessing something extraordinary, something beyond explanation. The glow on the water was hypnotic, drawing me closer to the bay's edge. I could feel the pull, as if the bay itself was calling me. I stepped forward, unable to resist. My foot slipped on the wet rocks, and I stumbled, catching myself just before falling in. The cold water splashed onto my hand, and I recoiled, feeling an intense burning sensation. It was as if the water was alive, rejecting me. I backed away, shaking my hand, which throbbed with pain. The glow on the water flickered and then vanished, leaving the bay in darkness once more. I sat down on the rocks, breathing heavily. My hands still burned, the skin red and raw. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I knew I needed to be careful. This place was dangerous, and I was in way over my head. Determined to continue, I checked my camera to see if it had captured the strange light. To my surprise, the footage was crystal clear. The glowing water, my stumble, and even the moment the light disappeared were all there. It was undeniable proof that something was happening here. But as I watched, I noticed something else. A shadow moved across the screen, just behind me. My blood ran cold as I replayed the footage, zooming in on the shadow. It was faint but unmistakable, a human figure standing just behind me. I quickly turned, scanning the dark woods, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my ears, and my hands shook as I held the camera. I had been alone, or so I thought. Who, or what, had been behind me? I felt a surge of panic and considered leaving, but my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what was happening in this bay. I decided to explore further along the shoreline, keeping my camera ready. As I walked, I noticed the trees growing thicker, their branches twisting together like skeletal fingers. The path became narrow and uneven, making it hard to keep my balance. The forest was unnaturally quiet. There were no sounds of animals, no birds singing or insects buzzing. Just the soft crunch of my footsteps on the undergrowth. I tried to focus, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every so often, I would hear a twig snap or a leaf rustle, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing. It was as if the shadows themselves were moving. I continued along the shoreline, the darkness growing thicker around me. The trees loomed over me like giants, their branches reaching out as if to grab me. I stumbled over a root and nearly fell, catching myself just in time. The silence was oppressive, weighing down on me like a heavy blanket. I could feel my heart racing, my breath coming in short gasps. As I pressed on, I spotted something strange in the distance. A small, dilapidated cabin stood near the water's edge, barely visible through the thick fog that had begun to roll in. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. The cabin looked old, abandoned for years, but there was a faint light flickering in the window. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach, but my curiosity once again got the better of me. I moved closer, stepping carefully over the rocks and fallen branches. The air grew colder with each step, and the fog thickened, making it hard to see. When I finally reached the cabin, I stood outside for a moment, listening. There was no sound, no movement, just the flickering light from within. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The door creaked loudly as I stepped inside. The cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. The light I had seen was coming from a small, flickering candle on a wooden table. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of broken furniture and a thick layer of dust covering everything. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this place had been untouched for a long time. I moved further into the cabin, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I approached the table, I noticed something strange. There were markings on the surface, carved deep into the wood. They looked like symbols, but I couldn't make out their meaning. I reached out to touch one of the carvings, but as soon as my fingers brushed the surface, a sharp pain shot through my hand, causing me to recoil in shock. The candle flickered violently, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was wrong here, something I couldn't explain. I glanced around the room, trying to make sense of it all, when I noticed a figure standing in the corner. It was just a silhouette, barely visible in the dim light, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I froze, staring at the figure in the corner. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness, sending shivers down my spine. I took a step back, my breath hitching in my throat. The figure remained still, but the air around it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Desperately, I reached for my flashlight and shone it towards the figure, but there was nothing there. Just empty space and shadows. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the figure had vanished. I was alone in the cabin, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My hands trembled as I turned to leave, my mind screaming at me to get out. As I stepped outside, the fog had grown thicker, swallowing the cabin and everything around it. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. Panic set in as I realized I didn't know which way to go. I tried to retrace my steps, but the fog distorted everything, making it impossible to find my way. I was lost, trapped in this haunted place with no way out. My heart raced as I stumbled blindly through the fog. Every direction looked the same, the dense mist swirling around me like a living entity. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, let alone find the path back to the bay. I tried to stay calm, but the eerie silence and oppressive fog made it difficult to think clearly. I was trapped in this nightmare with no end in sight. As I wandered aimlessly, I heard a faint sound in the distance. It was barely audible, but it sounded like a whisper, calling my name. I stopped, straining to hear it. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, echoing in my ears. My skin crawled as I realized the voice was coming from all around me, as if the fog itself was speaking. I turned in circles, trying to find the source, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The fog seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its thickness. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone. There was something in the fog with me, something unseen and malevolent. I could feel its presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to think or breathe. The silence was deafening, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I could feel the darkness closing in, suffocating me. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't move. It was as if the fog had a hold on me, keeping me trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, I heard a loud snap behind me, like a branch breaking. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The fog swirled around me, thick and impenetrable. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my hands shaking. I knew something was out there, watching me, stalking me. I had to get out, but I didn't know which way to go. Desperately, I began to run, pushing through the thick fog. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled over roots and rocks. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The fog seemed to close in around me, making it hard to breathe. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I had to escape, no matter the cost. As I ran, I saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through me as I pushed towards it, my legs screaming in protest. The light grew brighter, cutting through the fog like a beacon. I reached it and realized it was the bay, the dark waters glistening under the moonlight. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards the shore, desperate to get away from whatever was lurking in the fog. I collapsed onto the rocky beach, gasping for air. The fog still loomed behind me, but the bay seemed to offer some protection. I looked out over the water, trying to calm my racing heart. The moon cast a silvery glow over the bay, illuminating the dark, still waters. I knew I couldn't stay here, but I didn't know where else to go. As I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I saw something moving in the water. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it again, a shadowy figure, rising from the depths. My blood ran cold as I watched it emerge from the water, its eyes glowing in the moonlight. I knew then that the bay was not safe. I had to leave, but I didn't know how. The figure in the water moved closer, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the shore. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out. The fog was thick and disorienting, and the water was just as dangerous. I felt trapped, cornered by the very things I had come to investigate. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. I turned and ran along the shoreline, the rocky ground slippery beneath my feet. The figure in the water followed, moving with unnatural speed. I could hear the sound of splashing behind me, growing louder with each step. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed myself to run faster, my legs burning with the effort. I knew I couldn't outrun it forever, but I had to try. Suddenly, I saw a narrow path leading away from the bay, winding up into the forest. I veered towards it, hoping it would lead me to safety. The path was steep and treacherous, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from the water, away from the thing that was chasing me. I scrambled up the path, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The path was narrow and winding, twisting through the dense forest. I could barely see in the darkness, the fog making it hard to find my footing. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart racing as I tried to climb higher. The sound of splashing faded behind me, replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. As I climbed, the fog began to thin, revealing the dark outline of the trees. I could see the path ahead more clearly now, winding up the steep hill. I forced myself to keep moving, my legs aching with each step. I knew I couldn't stop, not yet. I had to get as far away from the bay as possible. Finally, I reached the top of the hill, collapsing onto the ground. I lay there, gasping for air, my body trembling with exhaustion. I looked back down the path, but there was no sign of the figure. The bay was hidden in the fog below, its dark waters invisible in the night. I felt a surge of relief, knowing I had escaped. But I also knew I wasn't safe yet. I had to find a way out of these woods. I got to my feet, my legs shaking. I needed to keep moving, to find a way back to civilization. I scanned the forest around me, looking for any sign of a path or trail. The trees loomed tall and dark, their branches swaying in the wind. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how alone I was out here. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, endless and unforgiving. I started walking, choosing a direction at random. The ground was uneven, covered in fallen leaves and branches. I moved slowly, careful not to make too much noise. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours. The darkness was disorienting, making it hard to tell time. I was exhausted, my body aching with each step. I knew I needed to rest, but I didn't dare stop. Not until I was sure I was safe. I kept moving, my eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a faint light in the distance. My heart leaped with relief as I stumbled towards it, praying it was a sign of civilization. As I got closer, I realized it was a small cabin, nestled among the trees. I approached cautiously, my mind racing with a mix of fear and hope. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows dark and broken. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The interior was small and cramped, filled with old furniture and dust. It looked like no one had been here in years. I felt a pang of disappointment, realizing I was still alone. But at least it was shelter. I closed the door behind me, sitting down on a rickety chair. My body ached with exhaustion, my mind numb with fear. I knew I needed to rest, but I couldn't relax. Not here, not in this place. I felt a sense of unease, like I was being watched. I looked around the cabin, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and silence. I decided to stay in the cabin for a while, hoping to regain my strength. I leaned back in the chair, trying to calm my racing heart. The room was cold and dark, the only light coming from the cracks in the walls. I could hear the wind howling outside, shaking the cabin with each gust. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, echoing in the small room. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were meant for me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone. I jumped to my feet, grabbing my flashlight. I shone it around the room, but there was no one there. Just empty space and shadows. The whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I felt a surge of panic, my hands shaking as I backed away. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know where to go. I rushed out of the cabin, into the dark forest. The wind whipped around me, howling through the trees. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my heart racing with fear. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to find a way out of this nightmare. I ran blindly through the woods, the darkness closing in around me. The trees seemed to twist and turn, blocking my path at every turn. I could hear the whispering again, growing louder with each step. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling my mind with fear. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside my head, screaming at me, driving me mad. I tripped over a root, falling hard to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The whispering grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, tearing me apart from the inside out. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, unable to move. The darkness pressed down on me, suffocating me with its weight. I could feel the cold earth beneath me, the rough bark of the trees against my skin. The whispering was deafening now, a cacophony of voices screaming in my ears. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I screamed, scrambling away, my heart racing. But when I turned, there was no one there. Just empty space and darkness. I could feel my mind slipping, the line between reality and nightmare blurring. I knew I had to get out of here, to find a way back to sanity. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling. I stumbled through the woods, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a path. The whispering followed me, growing louder with each step. I could feel it inside me, tearing at my soul, driving me mad. I knew I couldn't take much more of this. I had to find a way out, or I was going to lose my mind. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding with hope. As I got closer, I realized it was the entrance to the bay, the dark waters glistening under the moonlight. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards the shore, desperate to get away from the darkness. I collapsed onto the rocky beach, gasping for air. The whispering was gone, replaced by the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I looked out over the water, my mind numb with fear. I knew I had escaped, but I also knew I wasn't safe yet. The darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I got to my feet, my body aching with exhaustion. I looked out over the water, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I knew I had to leave this place, to get as far away as possible. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, someone who could guide me out of this nightmare. I turned and walked along the shore, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a path. As I walked, I felt a sense of dread growing inside me. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its weight. I could hear the whispering again, faint and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, screaming at me, tearing me apart from the inside out. I stumbled over a rock, falling hard to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The whispering grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, driving me mad. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling. I stumbled through the darkness, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of a path. The whispering followed me, growing louder with each step. I could feel it inside me, tearing at my soul, driving me mad. I knew I couldn't take much more of this. I had to find a way out, or I was going to lose my mind. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding with hope. As I got closer, I realized it was the entrance to the bay, the dark waters glistening under the moonlight. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards the shore, desperate to get away from the darkness. I collapsed onto the rocky beach, gasping for air. The whispering was gone, replaced by the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I looked out over the water, my mind numb with fear. I knew I had escaped, but I also knew I wasn't safe yet. The darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I got to my feet, my body aching with exhaustion. I looked out over the water, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I knew I had to leave this place, to get as far away as possible. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, someone who could guide me out of this nightmare. I turned and walked along the shore, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a path. As I walked, I felt a sense of dread growing inside me. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its weight. I could hear the whispering again, faint and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, screaming at me, tearing me apart from the inside out. I stumbled over a rock, falling hard to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The whispering grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, driving me mad. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling. I stumbled through the darkness, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of a path. The whispering followed me, growing louder with each step. I could feel it inside me, tearing at my soul, driving me mad. I knew I couldn't take much more of this. I had to find a way out, or I was going to lose my mind. As I walked, I felt a sense of dread growing inside me. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its weight. I could hear the whispering again, faint and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, screaming at me, tearing me apart from the inside out. I stumbled over a rock, falling hard to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The whispering grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, driving me mad. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling. I stumbled through the darkness, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of a path. The whispering followed me, growing louder with each step. I could feel it inside me, tearing at my soul, driving me mad. I knew I couldn't take much more of this. I had to find a way out, or I was going to lose my mind. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding with hope. As I got closer, I realized it was the entrance to the bay, the dark waters glistening under the moonlight. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards the shore, desperate to get away from the darkness. I collapsed onto the rocky beach, gasping for air. The whispering was gone, replaced by the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I looked out over the water, my mind numb with fear. I knew I had escaped, but I also knew I wasn't safe yet. The darkness was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I got to my feet, my body aching with exhaustion. I looked out over the water, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I knew I had to leave this place, to get as far away as possible. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, someone who could guide me out of this nightmare. I turned and walked along the shore, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a path. As I walked, I felt a sense of dread growing inside me. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its weight. I could hear the whispering again, faint and distant, like a voice carried on the wind. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, screaming at me, tearing me apart from the inside out. I stumbled over a rock, falling hard to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The whispering grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The voices were inside me, driving me mad. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling.
Story 2.
I had always been drawn to the mysteries of abandoned places, especially old railroads. There was something about their long-forgotten history that intrigued me, like silent witnesses to stories untold. One day, while researching local legends, I came across an old railway bridge in Blackwell, Tennessee. It had been abandoned after a devastating storm caused a train to derail and plunge into the river below, taking with it dozens of passengers. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the bridge being cursed, claiming that the souls of the dead passengers still wandered the area, unable to find peace. The idea of exploring such a place was irresistible to me. I had spent years documenting paranormal phenomena, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to add to my collection. Despite numerous warnings from the townspeople, who were adamant that the bridge was a place best left undisturbed, I prepared my equipment and set out for Blackwell. Armed with a camera, a voice recorder, and a determined spirit, I headed towards the infamous bridge, ready to uncover whatever secrets it might hold. As I approached the bridge, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The bridge loomed ahead, its rusted iron and decaying wood casting eerie shadows in the fading light. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I took a deep breath, adjusting my camera and setting up the voice recorder. If there was ever a time to confront my fears, it was now. With one last glance at the ominous structure, I stepped onto the bridge, unaware of the nightmare that awaited me. The first few minutes on the bridge were uneventful, almost disappointingly so. I walked across the creaking planks, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The only sound was the distant murmur of the river below and the occasional call of a night bird. I set up my camera to capture the surroundings and began recording, hoping to document any paranormal activity. The bridge felt deserted, its history seemingly lost in the twilight. As I reached the middle of the bridge, a sudden chill swept through the air. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a dense fog began to roll in from the river. It was as though the atmosphere itself was thickening, wrapping around me like a cold, damp shroud. I shivered, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. The fog obscured my vision, making the world around me seem even more alien and foreboding. Then, without warning, I heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound of wheels grinding against metal and a piercing whistle that cut through the silence. My heart raced as I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. The fog seemed to respond, swirling and coalescing into dark, shifting shapes that resembled human figures. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was not alone on the bridge. The shapes in the fog began to take form, revealing shadowy figures that moved with an unsettling grace. Their faces were contorted in expressions of fear, pain, and agony, as if they were caught in an endless moment of terror. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The figures seemed to reach out towards me, their ghostly hands stretching in my direction, as though pleading for assistance. I stumbled backward, my camera slipping from my grasp and hitting the wooden planks with a dull thud. The figures grew clearer, their spectral forms becoming more defined in the shifting fog. Their mouths moved soundlessly, and I could almost hear their desperate cries for help. I was paralyzed with horror, unable to move as the ghostly apparitions surrounded me, their presence a chilling reminder of the tragedy that had occurred here. Desperation took hold, and I tried to flee, but the bridge seemed to stretch on endlessly. The fog closed in, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet in any direction. The figures were everywhere now, their mournful wails filling the air. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fought to maintain my composure, Knowing that I had to escape this nightmare before it consumed me entirely, I in a blind panic, I ran along the bridge, my footsteps echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. The fog swirled around me, disorienting me and making every direction seem the same. I felt as though I was running in circles, unable to escape the clutches of the ghostly figures that seemed to follow me with relentless determination. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced on the fog-laden planks. The wails of the spirits grew louder, almost deafening, as if they were trying to communicate with me, to convey some unfinished business. My mind raced with fear and confusion, struggling to comprehend the intensity of the supernatural experience unfolding around me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the figures closing in, their hollow eyes and twisted faces a constant reminder of the tragedy that bound them to this place. As I continued to run, I spotted a faint, flickering light in the distance. It was a small beacon of hope in the sea of darkness. With renewed determination, I sprinted towards it, praying that it was an exit from this nightmarish realm. My breath came in ragged bursts, and my legs felt like lead, but I pushed on, driven by the desperate need to escape the malevolent spirits that haunted the bridge. The light grew brighter as I approached, revealing a small, dimly lit lantern perched precariously on the edge of the bridge. It was an odd sight, almost out of place amidst the ghostly fog and decaying timbers. I reached the lantern, its warm glow providing a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive darkness that surrounded me. It was as if the light was a sanctuary from the terror that had enveloped the bridge. I hesitated, unsure of whether to take comfort in the lantern's presence or to fear its possible connection to the supernatural forces at play. The fog seemed to part slightly around the lantern, creating a small, illuminated area where the figures dared not tread. My instincts told me to stay close to the light, so I huddled near it, trying to catch my breath and regain some semblance of control over my racing mind. The figures continued to hover at the edges of the light, their forms shifting and wailing in an almost mournful fashion. It was clear that they were bound to this place, unable to move beyond the fog and darkness that had claimed them. I could feel their longing, their desperation to be freed from their eternal torment. The realization was both chilling and heart-wrenching, and I knew I had to find a way to help them, or at least to help myself escape their grasp. As I stood by the lantern, I tried to focus on the surroundings, hoping to find some clue or way out of this nightmarish scenario. My mind was still reeling from the sight of the ghostly figures, their twisted faces etched into my memory. The sound of the wailing was a constant, haunting reminder of the tragedy that had occurred here. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as if it were alive and feeding off the fear in the air. I examined the lantern closely, hoping it might hold some significance or provide a means of escape. It was old and weathered, its metal casing rusted and tarnished. There were no discernible markings or symbols, only the faint glow of the flickering flame inside. Despite its warmth, it offered little comfort in the face of the overwhelming fear that gripped me. A sudden gust of wind blew through the bridge, causing the fog to swirl violently. The lantern's light flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe in the darkness. I could hear the figures' wails growing louder, more urgent, as if they were warning me of something. My pulse quickened, and I knew I had to act quickly before the fog consumed me once more. Summoning all my courage, I decided to move away from the lantern and explore the bridge further, hoping to find a way out of this haunting place. The fog had thickened again, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way cautiously along the bridge, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The sounds of the wailing grew more intense, filling my ears with a cacophony of grief and despair. The figures in the fog seemed to follow me, their spectral forms moving just beyond the reach of my light. I felt their presence acutely, a constant reminder of the tragic event that had doomed them to this eternal limbo. As I continued, I noticed a faint glimmer in the distance, a subtle break in the fog. With a mixture of hope and trepidation, I made my way toward it, hoping it would lead me to safety. the fog parted slightly, revealing a dilapidated platform at the far end of the bridge. It looked like a possible exit, but it was shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. I approached the platform with great caution, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The platform was old and decaying, with wooden planks that creaked under my weight. It was clear that no one had set foot here in years, and the remnants of what might have been railings or supports were now broken and rotting. The fog seemed to press in from all sides, the figures growing closer and more defined. Their wails were almost deafening now, a relentless chorus of sorrow and anger. I could feel their spectral hands brushing against me, cold and clammy. Desperation surged through me, and I realized that I had to find a way to escape before the figures overwhelmed me. I searched the platform for any signs of a way out or any possible means of communication. My flashlight swept across the area, revealing nothing but the decaying remnants of what might have once been a busy railway station. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of the lantern I had left behind, a small beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. With a renewed sense of determination, I made my way back to the lantern, trying to stay calm despite the growing sense of dread. The figures seemed to sense my approach, their wails growing louder and more urgent. I could feel their despair enveloping me, making it difficult to think clearly. I had to find a way to appease them or escape their clutches before it was too late. I reached the lantern and considered its warmth and light as my only sanctuary. The fog seemed to retreat slightly as I approached, creating a small haven of clarity. I tried to focus on the light, hoping it would guide me to safety. My hands trembled as I adjusted the lantern, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the fog-shrouded bridge. The figures remained at the edges of the light, their mournful cries a constant reminder of their torment. I could see their ghostly forms more clearly now, their faces a haunting blend of fear and despair. I knew I had to find a way to communicate with them or find another means of escape before the fog and their wails overwhelmed me completely. As the figures continued their haunting wails, I noticed a pattern in their movements. They seemed to be converging on a specific area of the bridge, their spectral forms coalescing around a central point. Curiosity and fear drove me to investigate this anomaly, despite the growing sense of dread that gripped me. I followed the figures' movements, my heart racing as I approached the central point they were converging on. The fog parted slightly, revealing a hidden alcove in the bridge's structure. Inside the alcove, I found what appeared to be an old, rusted compartment, its metal surface covered in grime and cobwebs. The compartment was partially open, and I hesitated before reaching inside. My hands shook as I fumbled with the rusted latch, trying to pry it open. The figures seemed to intensify their wails, their spectral forms pressing closer as if urging me to uncover whatever lay within the compartment. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to open it, revealing its dark contents. Inside the compartment, I discovered a collection of old, weathered items, broken trinkets, faded photographs, and scraps of paper. Each item seemed to tell a story of its own, a fragment of the lives that had been lost in the train wreck. Among the items was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. I carefully opened the journal, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was shaky but legible, recounting the events leading up to the fateful night of the train wreck. The entries spoke of fear and foreboding, of a sense of impending doom that had pervaded the passengers' thoughts. It was as if the writer had known that something terrible was about to happen. As I read the journal, the figures' wails grew more intense, their mournful cries almost pleading. It became clear that these spirits were trapped in a cycle of despair, their souls bound to the bridge by the tragedy that had befallen them. I realized that the journal might hold the key to understanding their torment and possibly finding a way to help them find peace. I continued to read the journal, trying to decipher its contents despite the overwhelming fear and the constant wailing of the spirits. The entries detailed the final moments of the train's journey, the growing storm, and the panic that had ensued. The writer had described the sense of helplessness and the desperation of the passengers as the train veered off course and plunged into the river. The more I read, the more I felt a connection to the writer and the passengers. Their fear and anguish were palpable, and it was clear that they had been trapped in their final moments of terror. The journal hinted at a ritual or a plea for forgiveness, suggesting that the spirits might be bound to the bridge by an unresolved matter or an unfulfilled request. Determined to help, I searched the compartment for any additional clues or instructions. The figures' wails grew louder, their spectral forms becoming more agitated. It was clear that they were reacting to my search, their cries a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. I knew I had to find a way to address their needs and help them find the peace they so desperately sought. The journal contained a final, cryptic entry that seemed to offer a clue to the spirit's torment. It spoke of a ritual that had been intended to ensure a safe passage for the passengers but had been interrupted by the storm. The writer mentioned a specific location on the bridge where the ritual had been performed, suggesting that this spot might hold the key to releasing the trapped souls. I retraced my steps, heading towards the area mentioned in the journal. The fog seemed to close in around me, and the figures' wails grew louder, their spectral forms pressing closer. Despite the growing sense of dread, I focused on the task at hand, hoping to find the spot where the ritual had taken place. As I reached the designated location, I found a small, worn circle etched into the wooden planks of the bridge. The circle was covered in grime and debris, but it was still visible. I knelt beside it, trying to make sense of its significance. The figures seemed to gather around the circle, their wails now a mixture of hope and desperation. It was clear that this was the focal point of their torment, and I had to figure out how to perform the ritual or fulfill the request mentioned in the journal. I carefully examined the circle, trying to decipher its meaning. The symbols etched into the wood were unfamiliar, and I struggled to understand their significance. I took out the journal and compared the symbols with those in the book, hoping to find a match or a clue to the ritual's requirements. As I worked, the figures' wails became more urgent, their presence almost overwhelming. I could feel their ghostly hands brushing against me, their cries echoing in my ears. The fog seemed to press in, making it difficult to see and breathe. I knew I had to act quickly before the spirit's desperation consumed me entirely. Suddenly, a realization struck me. The ritual described in the journal involved placing certain items in the circle as offerings. I searched the compartment for any remaining items that might be used in the ritual. Among the trinkets and photographs, I found a small, ancient-looking amulet. It seemed to resonate with a faint energy, and I hoped it might be the key to completing the ritual and releasing the spirits. I placed the amulet in the center of the circle, hoping that it would fulfill the requirements of the ritual. The fog seemed to recede slightly, and the figures' wails grew quieter, as if they were waiting for something to happen. I focused on the amulet, trying to channel my thoughts and intentions towards helping the trapped souls. As I stood by the circle, I felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The temperature seemed to rise slightly, and the fog began to thin. The figures' spectral forms seemed to waver, their faces showing a mix of hope and relief. It was as if they were beginning to understand that their release was near. The amulet began to glow softly, its light casting a gentle aura around the circle. The figures' wails became quieter, replaced by a soft, almost soothing murmur. I could feel a sense of calm washing over me, and I knew that the ritual was working. The spirits were finally finding the peace they had been denied for so long. As the amulet's glow intensified, the fog began to lift, revealing the bridge in its entirety. The figures' forms became less defined, their spectral presence fading as they moved towards the center of the bridge. The wails transformed into soft whispers of gratitude and farewell, and I felt a profound sense of relief. The once oppressive atmosphere now felt lighter, the weight of the spirit's despair lifting from the bridge. The fog dissipated, revealing the bridge's decaying structure and the river flowing peacefully below. The haunting presence that had dominated the bridge was now replaced by a serene stillness. I stood by the circle, watching as the last remnants of the figures dissolved into the night. The amulet's glow gradually faded, and the bridge returned to its abandoned state. I felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction, knowing that I had helped the trapped souls find the peace they had been seeking. With the spirits finally at rest, I made my way back across the bridge, my heart lighter than it had been when I arrived. The fog had lifted completely, and the night air felt crisp and clear. The oppressive weight that had hung over the bridge was gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. I glanced back at the bridge one last time, feeling a profound sense of closure. The lantern's light was now a distant memory, and the figures that had haunted the bridge were finally free. I knew that I had witnessed something truly extraordinary, and the experience would remain with me for the rest of my life. As I left Blackwell behind, I couldn't help but reflect on the nature of the spirits I had encountered and the mysteries of the old railway bridge. The experience had tested my courage and resolve, but it had also taught me about the power of compassion and the importance of helping those in need. Returning to my usual life felt strangely mundane after such a profound experience. The memory of the bridge and the spirits lingered with me, a haunting reminder of the thin boundary between the living and the dead. I found it difficult to explain the depth of my experience to others, as the supernatural events I had witnessed seemed beyond the grasp of ordinary understanding. I kept the journal and the amulet as mementos of my encounter, their significance a constant reminder of the night I had ventured into the unknown. The journal's entries and the amulet's glow were now part of my personal history, symbols of a journey that had changed me forever. Despite the lingering sense of awe and unease, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The experience had reinforced my belief in the supernatural and the existence of forces beyond our comprehension. It had also underscored the importance of facing our fears and seeking to understand the unknown, no matter how daunting it may seem. Over time, the story of my encounter with the spirits of Blackwell spread among my circle of friends and fellow researchers. The tale was met with skepticism and wonder, as people struggled to reconcile the extraordinary events with their own understanding of reality. I shared my findings with those who were open to the idea, hoping to shed light on the mysteries of the supernatural. The journal and amulet remained with me, a constant reminder of the bridge and the souls I had helped. I often revisited the memories of that night, reflecting on the bravery and resilience required to confront the unknown. The experience had become a defining moment in my life, shaping my perspective on the supernatural and my approach to exploring the mysteries of the world. As I continued my work as a paranormal researcher, I carried with me the lessons learned from Blackwell. The encounter had taught me about the depth of human emotion, the persistence of unresolved matters, and the need for compassion in the face of the unknown. It had also reinforced my belief that even in the darkest of places, there is hope for redemption and peace. Years later, as I look back on my time in Blackwell, I realize how profoundly it shaped my understanding of the supernatural. The bridge, once a place of terror and despair, had become a symbol of hope and resolution. The spirits that had haunted it were now at peace, and their story had become a part of my own. I often wonder if the bridge still stands, if the fog still rolls in on stormy nights, or if the ghosts have truly found their rest. The memory of that night remains vivid in my mind, a testament to the power of the unknown and the importance of seeking answers. In the end, my experience in Blackwell taught me that even in the most chilling and eerie of places, there is always a path to understanding and resolution. The bridge's haunting presence had been a challenge, but it had also been a profound lesson in empathy and perseverance. As I move forward, I carry with me the knowledge that the unknown is not something to fear, but something to be understood and, if possible, resolved.
Story 3.
When I first set foot on the grounds of the cursed Blackwood Hotel in Colorado, I had no idea how profoundly my life would change. This once majestic hotel, abandoned after a series of gruesome murders in the 1930s, harbored its secrets in every creak of its old wooden floors and every crack in its walls. The air seemed to carry whispers of anguish and unfulfilled desires, creating an atmosphere thick with malevolence. As I crossed the threshold, a chilling sensation ran down my spine. The heavy air was laced with the musty smell of decay and neglect. Shadows danced on the walls, shifting and writhing as if they had a life of their own. Each step I took felt like an intrusion into a world that had been left behind but was still very much alive. The hotel's once grand interior was now a labyrinth of faded wallpaper and broken fixtures. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and reach out towards me. Dust-covered furniture and scattered belongings from a bygone era spoke of a sudden and violent end to the lives that once filled these rooms. The corridors were a maze of neglect and abandonment, each turn revealing more of the hotel's desolate state. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional groan of the old structure settling. I could almost hear faint echoes of past conversations, now replaced by an unsettling quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. My flashlight illuminated remnants of the hotel's former grandeur, tarnished chandeliers, broken mirrors, and faded portraits of long-gone guests. Each object seemed frozen in time, trapped in a moment of horror and despair. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread and pushed forward, driven by a need to uncover the secrets of this cursed place. As I ventured deeper into the hotel, a cold draft began to creep through the halls. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the shadows along the walls seemed to move with a sinister purpose, following my every move with an eerie precision. I found myself drawn to the old dining room, where the remnants of a once lavish setting lay buried under layers of dust and cobwebs. The grandiose table, now covered in grime, was surrounded by chairs that had not been sat in for decades. An unsettling feeling washed over me as I approached, as if the room itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room, making me jump. I whirled around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The oppressive silence returned, even more profound than before. I could feel a growing sense of unease as if the very walls of the hotel were closing in on me. The whispers of the past seemed to grow louder, mingling with the sound of my own heartbeat. I could almost feel the presence of unseen eyes watching me from the darkness, their silent judgment weighing heavily on my shoulders. I shook off the feeling and continued my exploration, determined to find answers despite the mounting terror. I moved cautiously through the darkened hallways, each step echoing through the empty spaces. The cold draft grew stronger, and the once still shadows began to writhe and shift, creating eerie shapes on the walls. My flashlight flickered unpredictably, casting a strobe-like effect that heightened the sense of dread. The old, ornate staircase creaked ominously as I ascended, each step echoing through the silence. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, and the air grew colder with every step I took. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in around me, and I struggled to keep my flashlight steady as I reached the upper floors. The upper levels were even more dilapidated, with walls peeling and floors buckling under the strain of time. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of dripping water or the distant rustle of something unseen. The oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to focus, and I felt a growing sense of foreboding as I explored the abandoned rooms. The rooms on the upper floors were a stark contrast to the once elegant accommodations below. Furniture was overturned, and personal belongings lay scattered as if the occupants had fled in a panic. I could sense an eerie presence in each room, as though the very air was charged with the residual energy of past traumas. As I examined one of the rooms, a sudden, sharp noise made me jump. It was followed by a series of faint, disembodied whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I could barely make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably pleading, as if the voices were desperate for release from some unknown torment. My flashlight flickered one last time before dying completely, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for my backup light, but the oppressive silence and darkness made it difficult to think clearly. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, and the sense of being followed became almost unbearable. With my backup light finally flickering to life, I continued to explore the upper floors, though my sense of unease had reached a new level. The dim beam of my flashlight revealed walls covered in strange symbols and messages scrawled in what looked like old blood. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something more sinister, something that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. The oppressive silence was occasionally broken by distant, echoing noises, a door slamming shut, a low, mournful wail. Each sound seemed to come from a different direction, creating a disorienting effect that made it difficult to discern reality from hallucination. I found myself questioning whether the noises were real or merely figments of my imagination. As I ventured further into the hotel's heart, I came across a room that seemed to have been untouched by time. An old diary lay open on a dusty table, its pages yellowed and brittle. The diary's entries spoke of madness, fear, and dark rituals performed in the very rooms I was now exploring. The more I read, the more the sense of dread grew, as if the diary was an omen of the horrors to come. In the dim light of my flashlight, the diary's pages revealed disturbing details about the hotel's past. The entries described a series of horrific events leading up to the murders, inexplicable disappearances, strange sightings, and violent outbursts from the hotel's staff. The writer's descent into madness was evident, their handwriting becoming increasingly erratic and disjointed. As I continued reading, I began to notice a pattern in the diary's accounts. The entries described a growing malevolence within the hotel, a dark force that seemed to feed on fear and despair. It was clear that whatever had taken hold of the hotel was not merely a collection of restless spirits, but something far more sinister and destructive. The air around me seemed to grow colder as I finished reading, and the oppressive silence returned. My flashlight began to flicker again, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. I could feel the weight of the diary's revelations pressing down on me, and the sense of being watched became almost overwhelming. The deeper I delved into the hotel's dark history, the more I felt the oppressive presence of the malevolent force described in the diary. Each room I entered seemed to hold a new layer of horror, with unsettling discoveries that only heightened my sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the very air felt charged with a palpable sense of evil. As I made my way to the hotel's old ballroom, I noticed strange markings on the floor, symbols that matched those described in the diary. The room was eerily silent, the grandeur of the past now reduced to a decaying shell. The shadows seemed to dance and twist in the dim light, creating nightmarish shapes that made it difficult to focus. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and a gust of cold wind blew through the ballroom, extinguishing my flashlight. I was plunged into darkness once more, and the oppressive silence was broken by the sound of shuffling footsteps and distant, echoing cries. Panic set in as I fumbled to relight my flashlight, feeling a growing sense of dread and helplessness. As my flashlight flickered back to life, I was met with an unsettling sight. The ballroom's once grand chandeliers now swayed gently, though there was no breeze to explain their movement. The cold, stale air was filled with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet. I could see the outlines of ghostly figures moving in the shadows, their forms barely distinguishable from the darkness. Their eyes seemed to follow me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The feeling of being watched became almost unbearable, and I could sense the presence of something far more sinister lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. Determined to uncover the truth, I pressed on, despite the growing terror that threatened to overwhelm me. The ballroom, with its decaying grandeur and haunting presence, seemed to hold the key to understanding the hotel's dark past. I knew that to escape this nightmare, I would need to confront the malevolent force that had claimed this place as its own. My exploration led me to the hotel's basement, a place that had been described in the diary as the epicenter of the malevolent force. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, and the air grew colder with every step I took. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and the oppressive silence was almost deafening. The basement was a maze of old storage rooms and forgotten relics. Dust-covered furniture and rusted metal shelves lined the walls, creating a labyrinth of decay and neglect. I felt a growing sense of unease as I moved through the maze, the shadows around me seeming to shift and move with a sinister intent. In one of the rooms, I discovered a series of strange, ritualistic symbols etched into the walls. The symbols matched those I had seen earlier, and the air felt charged with an ominous energy. I could almost feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent, lurking just out of sight, watching my every move with a dark, malevolent gaze. As I continued to explore the basement, the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to pulse and writhe with an unnatural life of their own. I stumbled upon an old, locked door at the end of a dimly lit corridor. The door was marked with the same symbols I had seen earlier, and it seemed to emanate a palpable sense of evil. With trembling hands, I managed to force the door open. The room beyond was small and windowless, with a single, dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was an old altar, covered in strange artifacts and remnants of past rituals. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread, and I could feel the weight of the malevolent force pressing down on me. As I examined the altar, I noticed a series of old photographs scattered across the table. The photographs depicted scenes of the hotel's past, including images of the victims and the people involved in the dark rituals. The faces in the photographs were twisted in expressions of terror and pain, and I could sense the anguish of the souls trapped within the hotel's walls. The discovery of the altar and the photographs deepened the sense of horror that had been building throughout my investigation. The rituals described in the diary and the artifacts I had found painted a disturbing picture of the hotel's past. It became clear that the malevolent force was not just a collection of restless spirits but something far darker and more powerful. As I prepared to leave the basement, a sudden gust of cold wind extinguished my flashlight once more. The darkness was oppressive and suffocating, and I could hear the sound of shuffling footsteps growing louder. Panic set in as I fumbled to relight my flashlight, but the oppressive silence seemed to close in around me, making it difficult to think clearly. When the light finally flickered back to life, I was met with an unsettling sight. The basement was no longer as I had left it. The shadows seemed to have grown darker, and the symbols on the walls appeared to have shifted, forming new, more disturbing patterns. The sense of malevolence was palpable, and I knew I had to leave the hotel before it consumed me completely. I raced up the stairs, the oppressive darkness and the feeling of being pursued driving me forward. The hotel's once familiar layout now seemed alien and twisted, the shadows stretching and warping in unsettling ways. The sense of dread grew with every step, and I could hear the whispers of the past growing louder, almost as if they were trying to pull me back. As I reached the main floor, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows. I could feel the malevolent presence radiating from it, and I knew that whatever had taken hold of the hotel was not ready to let me go. Summoning every ounce of courage, I sprinted towards the exit. The whispers and footsteps seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the presence of the malevolent force growing stronger. I had to escape, but the hotel seemed determined to keep me trapped within its walls. Finally, I reached the main entrance of the hotel, but the door was inexplicably jammed. Desperately, I pulled and pushed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers and shuffling footsteps grew louder, and the oppressive darkness seemed to press in from all sides. My heart raced as I fought to escape, knowing that every second spent inside the hotel increased the risk of being consumed by its malevolent force. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to force the door open. The night air was a welcome relief, and I stumbled outside, gasping for breath. The sense of being watched slowly faded, but the memory of the hotel's darkness and the malevolent presence that had pursued me remained etched in my mind. I looked back at the Blackwood Hotel, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. The sense of dread and horror that had accompanied me throughout my investigation was now replaced by a profound sense of relief. I had escaped, but the experience had left an indelible mark on me, and I knew that the hotel's dark secrets would haunt me for the rest of my life. As I drove away from Blackwood Hotel, I tried to make sense of the events I had witnessed. The memories of the night were a jumbled mess of fear, darkness, and malevolence. The images of the ghostly figures and the disturbing symbols etched into the walls replayed in my mind, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Despite the relief of leaving the hotel behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something important unresolved. The malevolent force that had lurked within the hotel seemed to have an insidious hold on me, and I knew that the experience had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. The drive back to civilization was a blur of night and road, my mind consumed by the events of the past few hours. I couldn't escape the feeling that the darkness of the Blackwood Hotel had followed me, lingering just beyond the edges of my perception. Upon returning to my home, I found it difficult to adjust to the normalcy of daily life. The experience at the Blackwood Hotel had left me feeling unsettled and on edge. The once familiar surroundings of my home now seemed strange and foreign, as if I were still trapped in the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. Sleep eluded me as the memories of the night replayed in my mind. The whispers, shadows, and ghostly figures seemed to follow me into my dreams, creating a never-ending cycle of fear and unease. The darkness that had consumed the hotel now seemed to cling to me, making it difficult to find solace or peace. I tried to reach out to friends and colleagues, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But each attempt to discuss the events of the night was met with skepticism and disbelief. I felt isolated and alone, burdened by a secret that I couldn't share with anyone. The more I reflected on my experience, the more I became convinced that the Blackwood Hotel was not merely a haunted place but a conduit for something far more malevolent. The diary, the rituals, and the disturbing symbols all pointed to a dark force that had been unleashed and was now seeking to extend its influence beyond the hotel's walls. I began to research the hotel's history in greater depth, hoping to uncover more information about the dark rituals and the malevolent entity that had taken hold of the place. My research led me to a series of old newspapers and documents that detailed the hotel's violent past and the mysterious disappearances of those who had investigated its secrets. As I delved deeper into the history, I discovered that the hotel had once been the site of a series of occult ceremonies performed by a secretive cult. The rituals described in the diary matched those performed by the cult, and it became clear that the malevolent force was a result of these dark practices. Determined to uncover the full extent of the hotel's dark history, I reached out to historians and paranormal experts, hoping to find additional insights into the malevolent force that had plagued Blackwood Hotel. I was met with a mix of skepticism and intrigue, but a few experts were willing to help me in my quest. Together, we pieced together the fragmented history of the hotel and the cult that had once operated there. The more we learned, the more it became apparent that the cult's rituals had been designed to summon and bind a dark entity, a force of malevolence that had been trapped within the hotel's walls. Our research revealed that the entity had not been fully contained, and its influence had seeped into the hotel's very fabric. The ghostly figures and disturbing phenomena reported by previous investigators were a manifestation of this dark force, which continued to feed on fear and despair. As we continued our investigation, we encountered numerous accounts of people who had experienced similar horrors at the Blackwood Hotel. Many of these accounts mirrored my own experiences, describing ghostly apparitions, eerie sounds, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The consistency of these accounts provided a chilling confirmation of the malevolent entity's presence and its ability to manipulate and terrify those who entered the hotel. It became clear that the entity's influence was not limited to the hotel itself but extended to those who came into contact with it. Our research also uncovered a series of tragic events that had occurred after the hotel's closure. Many individuals who had ventured into the hotel in search of answers had met with untimely and unexplained deaths. The pattern of these deaths seemed to reinforce the idea that the entity was actively seeking to perpetuate its reign of terror. The more we uncovered, the more I realized that the Blackwood Hotel was not just a haunted location but a focal point for a dark and malevolent force that had transcended time and space. The entity that had been summoned by the cult's rituals had become a conduit for fear and despair, affecting not only those who entered the hotel but also those who came into contact with its lingering presence. Our investigation revealed that the only way to truly neutralize the entity was to perform a counter-ritual, one that would undo the damage done by the cult's original ceremonies. This ritual required specific conditions and rare artifacts, and we began to gather the necessary components for the ritual. As we prepared to undertake this dangerous task, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The entity's influence was still strong, and I knew that performing the counter-ritual would be a perilous endeavor. But I also knew that it was the only way to break the cycle of fear and suffering that had plagued the Blackwood Hotel and those who had encountered its malevolent presence. The day of the counter-ritual arrived, and we gathered at the Blackwood Hotel once more. The atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation, as we prepared to confront the malevolent entity that had caused so much suffering. As we began the ritual, the hotel's dark energy seemed to surge and writhe with anger. The shadows grew more oppressive, and the whispers of the past grew louder, almost as if they were trying to resist our efforts. We had to fight against the entity's attempts to thwart our progress, and the atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of danger. Despite the challenges, we persevered and completed the counter-ritual. The darkness that had plagued the hotel seemed to lift, and the oppressive atmosphere began to recede. The sense of dread and malevolence that had permeated the hotel for so long seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a feeling of uneasy calm. As we completed the counter-ritual, the Blackwood Hotel seemed to undergo a transformation. The oppressive darkness that had once hung over the place began to dissipate, and the ghostly apparitions that had haunted the hotel seemed to fade away. The once terrifying environment of the hotel was now eerily quiet, and the sense of malevolence that had permeated every corner seemed to have lifted. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from the hotel's walls, and the spirits trapped within were finally free. Despite the relief of seeing the hotel's transformation, I knew that the experience had left a lasting impact on me. The horrors I had witnessed and the darkness I had encountered had changed me forever. The Blackwood Hotel's secrets were now laid bare, but the memory of the malevolent entity and its influence would remain with me. In the aftermath of the counter-ritual, the Blackwood Hotel was sealed off once more, and it seemed that its dark influence had finally been quelled. The hotel was left to decay and crumble, a silent reminder of the horrors that had once been contained within its walls. As I left the hotel behind for the final time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet closure. The entity that had terrorized so many had been subdued, but the experience had left an indelible mark on me. The darkness of the Blackwood Hotel would forever remain a part of my past, a haunting reminder of the thin line between the living and the supernatural. The drive away from Blackwood was both a relief and a torment. The relief of leaving the nightmare behind was tempered by the haunting memories that clung to me, a constant reminder of the horrors that had unfolded. As the hotel disappeared from view, I knew that my life would never be the same again.